So, hello everybody, Shazone here. Yeah, high school's done. This has been a most interesting time, and you guys will be getting the experience video that I promised. Now, I know I promised an entire series on it, but I decided since all of high school culminated in one experience, I should follow suit. It has been an interesting past couple days, I won't even lie. There's enthusiasm, sentiment, readiness, and most definitely unreadiness. But most of all, there has been the time to look back on it all. Things that I try my hardest to remember, and things that I try my hardest to forget. Either or, they are part of the 4 years that have formed me. The results of my choices and the consequences of them have taught me plenty over these 4 years, for better or for worse. I suppose I should start with the transition-y bit. You know that portion where you leave as the big bad 8th grader to become a freshman? Well, let me tell you, any transition out of 8th grade is tough. If there was any inspiring thing that I had to say about 4th grade, is that it does eventually end. Then, you were either prepared for or unprepared for high school. High school is the experience that I learned the most from because it offered freedom. The freedom to choose, to do, to not to do. Anything done or undone was on your time. Especially since I was moving to a much bigger school. 200 kids K through 12 was huge in comparison to the old school, and just like any school, there was a little bit of a new culture to change into. Thankfully, I only spent the first day or so getting lost. It's not really a big school. Now, there isn't actually much for me to say about the freshman and sophomore years. Learning the ropes of high school, running cross-country, as done in my cross-country experience video, and becoming familiar with a little something called anime. Hey, we all have our little addictions, right? I'm not saying that they were a useless time, but they were more of a transition than a formation. No, what I'll talk about from here on is what I call the tale of the sophomore year. A time where I was almost sent to the hospital from a week-long case of dehydration. It put me far behind in everything, and put me in a little bit of a rut. It was a time where I realized that there were significant flaws in my character and behavior. Maybe not on the outside, but rather worldview. I didn't really have anything to hold on to. That's when this time turned from a miserable time, when I was down in the dumps, into one of the best things to ever happen to me. And that, there is no doubt, it was a time of reflection, a time of revelation, and a time of change. There are two particular factors that I consider for this. One, at the same time I happened to commence my confirmation classes. Two, my French teacher was really an awesome person. I will describe these two things as they still resonate within me. The first is about as simple as it can get. There's a tendency when things get tough, people establish a better relationship with the Lord. The teacher of the confirmation course was a very wise individual, and I happened to get a deep look into the human soul right at the time that I needed it the most. The second deserves more of an explanation than that, and I have mentioned this several times within my inspiration series back on Epic Productions. She was namely a person of virtue and respect, a strict Canadian Frenchwoman that you could be either on the good side of or the bad side of. I'll admit, most people I know happened to get on the bad side, and thus didn't really have fond memories of her. Started giving me warnings and whatnot before her class even began. Apparently, they just didn't know how to behave. If you couldn't tell previously, philosophy is a topic that I am heavily interested in, and she was a rare teacher in that. If anything, she became as much a mentor in philosophy as a teacher in French. Take, for example, little lessons like every day having what she called the menu de jour, a sheet with a French proverb. I could come up with speeches about her class, but I decided that there would be something far better. I was always planning on sharing a paper from last year with everybody anyways, and I finally get my chance. It was a personal narrative essay devoted to her and my experiences in her class. This paper is the sole reason I passed college composition, and to date, the best piece of writing I have ever produced. To say that she was vital to my high school experience is an understatement. The essay goes as follows. Au revoir, Madame B. The relationship between a student and a teacher is something truly amazing. Within the period of a year, a teacher and myself got very close. Instead of being just a teacher, she quickly became a mentor to me, teaching me things that I likely never would have learned elsewhere. This teacher, Madame B, taught me ways of life up to the day that she retired. Madame Dorothy Bertrand was a French teacher of my small school in Canaan, Vermont, and she was amazing. Because students had difficulty saying her name, she went by the simple nickname of Madame B. She was a stern but kind person in her middle 60s. She was nice, but also quick to point out to students when they misbehave. Her hair was a short curly black. She had a squat build, being around 5.5 feet tall. Every time she spoke, you could hear the Canadian-French accent from her life in Montreal. She was also very highly optimistic and often had a comforting smile. When you are in any form of relationship with someone, the little moments have a lot of meaning. In spending an hour with her every day for a year, I had so many fond moments that they are beyond count. Every day on the whiteboard, she would write what she called the menu du jour, a sentence in French that would be translated to English. This is the first thing that the students would do every day in class. While at a quick glance it seems like a common exercise, the sentence always was something special. The few words that comprised a sentence became part of something far greater. Every sentence was a common proverb in French. She would sit and wait behind her desk, greeting the students as they entered and watched them start. Around 10 minutes later, after all the translations were finished and pencils put down, Madame B would stand up from her desk and walk over to the table where the students sat. From there she would sit with us and recite the translation with us word for word. After the translations were went over and errors fixed, she would ask the entire table, "What does this mean?" Some days we would not know the answer to this question, and she would quickly give the proverbial lesson that emanates significant meaning within this phrase. Some days we would know and say the equivalent of this phrase in English. Either way, a 10-minute discussion ensued where everyone stated how this line applied to real life. Every day I was excited at her ability to make a life lesson out of an everyday lesson. After this, we would start our lessons. Every single one was as much about the culture as of the words. As important as the French words were, this gave them more meaning. Within a short amount of time, we learned about French attitude and their way of life. Far longer than I will remember the French language, the memories of class-long discussions about cultural differences will play around in my mind. These discussions had a feel of expansiveness to them that I could connect to and understand more about a faraway foreign people with every day she gave a lesson. Instead of focusing solely on words, she focused on a way of life, showcasing that people do different things away from home, but it is all answering the same questions. Every day, we covered the questions of life. With the open-endedness of her teaching, there were multiple things that we all learned something new. She believed that everyone should always learn something new, so she ended up learning as much from us students as we learned from her. Mostly they are minor, inconsequential even, but there was something about her open attitude that made these things more important than what they really are. Such as the day where all of the class were sitting around playing the board game Buzzword on a day approaching Christmas while a snowstorm raged outside. One of the questions led me to referencing the Heat Miser and Snow Miser from the 1974 movie A Year Without a Santa Claus. All the other classmates took little to no notice of the reference, as most of them had seen it from the Christmas reruns that play on television every year. Yet Madame B wondered what this reference was, leading me to show her what these two are by showing a video of the scene with their song. Her face gleamed as the musical number started, and it was finished. And when it was finished, she said, "Thank you." A little thing such as that encompassed what her overlying lesson the entire time I spent with her class. She had never watched the movie in her life in Montreal. It was then that I realized especially what she had been teaching. People across the world lead very different lives from their foreign counterparts, yet aside from culture, they answer the same questions that life brings. In fact, one day she furthered this by arranging a day where she brought in several local French people who moved down from Quebec. She told stories of their experience of the culture that they had experienced living in Canada. It was close to the end of the year, and that day Madame B told the story of her childhood. She lived in a small town where the population was quickly growing in English speakers. She learned the language by playing with the kids on the street, picking up words as she went along. At that young age, she remembers her father reading the news in English, a newspaper that she could barely understand. We students couldn't comprehend the life that she lived in this world that seemed so different, yet we could still relate. That was what that day taught me. Everyone is different, but they all have the same wants and needs as me. With this lesson, I could understand people that I do not know thousands of miles away, and it doesn't matter that I cannot understand what they say or what they do. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. The day she retired was one that I will never forget. Days before, I wrote her a very personal letter thanking her for everything. So the day of the finals came. The air was thick with tension, knowing that this is the last day before she left to go to Quebec. The taking of the finals was different, as it was full of that tension the whole time. The tests ended quickly enough, and we had time left. She handed out to every kid a letter with a picture attached to it. The picture was the entire class playing a board game, looking up at the camera with a grin on their faces. The picture itself wasn't special, but it did show the power of the class bonding around her. Just for me was a special piece of paper taped to the picture. It had a French quote on it, one that she had on her desk the entire 8 years that she's been teaching there. On n'enseigne pas ce que l'on sait ou ce que l'on croit savoir. On enseigne et on ne peut enseigner que ce que l'on est. Okay, maybe my French isn't quite what it used to be, but anyways, this phrase is genius, and it directly reflected her style of teaching. It says that one does not teach what we know or think we know, rather we teach what we are. Every day for 8 years she taught with who she was. She also took me aside in private and handed me a book, Le Petit Prince. She called it a life Bible, a term that I didn't come to believe until later after reading the book. While it could be seen as a humble collection of words on paper, the book has deep spiritual meaning and quotes to live by. Forever in my mind will be the quote, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." All these things were gifts of goodbye, touching me in a deep and personal level. The tension of finality continued to permeate the air until the bell sounded its ring. The ring was the same as it was every day, and should have been a joyous sound on the last day of school. Yet, the bell stirred that air, that this was the end of a good thing. All the other kids quickly filed out of the room. Madame B and I stood close, looking at each other for what felt like an eternity. Goodbyes are always hard, and this was a strong student-teacher relationship. Madame B seemed prepared as she told me something I would likely never forget. The exact wording is lost, but the message is not and will never be. She looked up to me in class. As it turns out, her grandson up in Quebec was born with autism like me. This was something that caused her to worry about his future until she saw me. My behavior filled her with the confidence that he was going to live a happy, successful life. As such, she taught me. It turns out I had taught her a lot too. We ended with a final hug. It was a quick hug, but long enough that she got to say au revoir, Dylan. I got to say au revoir, Madame B, before we parted our separate ways. The most painful moment in somebody's relationship is goodbye. In an ironic twist of fate, a goodbye can be the best moment that two people can have together. As much as I would have preferred to still be with her, never will I forget the day that I said au revoir to Madame B. The letter I read every day and kept close by my side until the end of July. Even now I keep the letter safe at the top of my hutch in our hallway. It is there where I know it is always when I need to grab it. Every so often I do run out and grab it just to read the letter again. I honestly start to cry sometimes from the pleasant memories while reading this letter. The care and passion of the words, written in blue ink, speak louder to me than any typed letter. Special was the line, "Dylan, you have made a difference in my class. Every day I looked up, Dylan, you have made a difference in my life. Every day I looked up to for your presence in our class." Every time I went over it, it had intrigued me. Until that point, I didn't know I was that special to her and that I had actually made a difference. Even though goodbyes can be painful, they will be remembered forever. It is now more than then that I realize how special she is. I carry her words and beliefs with me still, despite her being where I likely will not see her again. The thing about special people is that their lessons stay with you long after they are gone. I am thankful for the chance to be with her, and for the chance to say, au revoir, Madame B. I may or may not have cried a few times while I was writing this piece. Now, what was the outcome of this sentiment? Between this and the convenience of a friend of mine doing a similar style of videos beforehand, I started myself a little video series. It goes by the name of Inspirations, a 50-part series that you may have heard of. It was very successful, that's why it's the namesake of this new channel, and it is part of the reason I am here today. Its quality was terrible back then, but it was a time where I had a revelation almost every single day and pushed to be the very best that I could be. Junior year was just an absolute train where I pushed and did things that I thought were beyond my own capabilities. What were these things? Well, two things that I decided to join junior year, and were especially crucial: clubs and diversified agriculture. I'll start with the clubs, and especially Key Club comes to mind. I joined this club on the fly in junior year, hearing good words about it. I wasn't a fan of dues and people, so I was planning on just showing up to get to the meetings and getting charity things to do, because finding random people doing yard work and helping them out on the weekends just wasn't quite enough anymore. I didn't know what to expect, but let me sure tell you, it was the right decision. It gave me opportunities to do things that I never even knew I could do, and it made me grow and spread out at an alarming pace. Like literally everything else, I could probably spend hours talking about old war stories if I could even try to remember them all. Decon was a culmination of this, and I am not discussing that topic here because the last time I talked about it, it took 13 minutes. Now, after this, there were other clubs that I have contributed to, such as OVX, where I met the likes of Zach, a keynote speaker that had become invested in the Inspiration series last year and motivated me to push it to even further heights. There was a writing club which suffered a premature end due to membership reasons, but did kindle the passion of writing in me anyways. Then there was the FFA, which deals more in agriculture, so I'll use it as the perfect time to talk about diversified ag. What is diversified agriculture? Well, you see, it is a hands-on experience in which we spend the whole afternoon every day for 2 years learning about all of the facets one could imagine in the agricultural field. If there is any one thing that has taught me to go above and beyond in my work ethic, it is certainly this. Making Reeves, making maple syrup, it was a blast. However, there was always a job to do, and it felt like a job where you had to show up or else the crew was down a vital member. That's probably one of the things that I remember most about ag, the fact that it turns classmates into a crew and not a bunch of people vying for the top of the class or anything fancy like that. Everyone had to count on everybody, and thus agriculture was another perfect place to learn more communication and diplomatic skills. In ag, tempers could flare, and sometimes words could be said. But in the end, everybody has to come back the next day and work together, so there could be no such thing as beef. In this regard, I believe it has trained me for the workforce ahead. I definitely have plenty of old war stories for this class, trust me, plenty, but that'll have to be a topic for another day. In the end, that's just a little bit of what I can say about the high school experience. There can be stories that I could fill days with, especially in this time before graduation, but they'll have to be for later times. Many people say that high school is to prepare you for real life. I say real life does a plenty good job of doing that itself. High school makes you yourself for real life. It makes you decide what and when is important to you, and can motivate you for success. Anybody can live in the real world and survive, even without high school. However, depending on the choices you make, everybody thrives a little bit differently, and high school is the time to learn how.